How is both the most important and least talked about piece of interview advice you can find online. Did you ever wonder why some people consistently seem to ace their job interviews while others don't? Well, the ones that consistently focus on how they did things, that's behavioral answers, and how they would do things, hypothetical answers, are the people that consistently get hired after their job interviews. So, in today's video, we're going to focus on helping you bring out the how in your interview answers. And we need to start by doing a significant and deep dive into the science and psychology of why the how is so important. And with these items, there's simply no gray area. All the advice that ignores these items is guessing what will help you, whereas this information is backed by data. So let's start with the science. When you explain how you did something, you're engaging more than just the language centers of the interviewer's brain. You're activating their sensory and motor cortices as well. So, what does that mean? Research shows that when listeners hear action related words, it stimulates the same areas of the brain that would be active if they were performing the actions themselves. This phenomenon is due to something called mirror neurons. They're basically just specialized brain cells that mirror the behavior of others. So when you vividly describe how you led a successful project, program, or initiative, for example, when answering a behavioral question, you're not just telling them, you're making them feel it. And this neural mirroring creates a deeper connection and makes your experiences not only more relatable, but more memorable as well. Now, let's focus on a fun topic cognitive psychology. So, cognitive psychology suggests that people who process persuasive messages through two routes. Basically, they're looking at things from a central and peripheral route. So, what does this mean? By providing a detailed explanation of how you would achieve something, for example, when answering a hypothetical question, you're engaging the listener's central route of processing. And what this means is that they're just more likely to pay attention and remember what you said. In contrast, simply stating what you might do in a hypothetical answer, but not providing how you would do it, often leads to that peripheral processing where the listener might not fully engage with what you're saying. So, the more you delve into the how, the more cognitively invested the interviewer becomes. Let's dive back into the science. And are we having fun yet? I know it's a lot. Uh, I'm sure you've noticed how a good story can captivate you. And that's because storytelling triggers neural coupling. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, when a speaker tells a story, the listener's brain actively mirrors that of the speaker, building a stronger connection between the two of you. So, by weaving the how into your responses, you're essentially telling a story through how. This not only makes your answer more engaging, it also facilitates a stronger emotional connection with the interviewer. Let's go back to a little bit of that cognitive piece and talk about cognitive biases. So, as humans, we have a tendency to attribute others' actions to their character while attributing our own actions to circumstances. So, what does that mean? When you explain how you have or how you would achieve results, you provide context that completely mitigates this bias. You're helping the interviewer understand the situational factors and thought processes behind your previous actions or the actions on the hypothetical side that you'd like to take. So, presenting a more balanced and accurate picture of your abilities when talking through these items. We're going to dive just a little bit more into psychology, and then I promise I'll share how we're actually going to go about it. So, sharing the how taps into a principle of self disclosure. So, when you reveal your methods and thought processes, you're being more open and transparent, which can increase your likability and trustworthiness in the eyes of the interviewer. And this openness can absolutely set you apart from other candidates who are probably likely, providing just limited details and not diving into the how or not diving into the how enough. cognitive load theory. I want to continue to go back to science and then talk about these cognitive components. So, this theory takes into account that our working memory has limited capacity. This is critical. So, by structuring your how explanations clearly and logically, you reduce the cognitive load on your interviewer, who, outside the hiring manager, rarely has any incentive to pay attention. And I could go on into all the science and psychology behind the how, but we got to flip, right? Let's talk about how to implement this in your job interview. And let's start with behavioral questions. So, behavioral questions are questions that start with tell me about a time when, give me an example of, what did you do in X scenario? And I always recommend using the STAR method to answer these questions. The STAR method is situation, task, actions, and results. And when talking about how, this will mostly come up in your actions. So, what does that look like exactly? It's taking your what you did, and drilling down to the next level. And it's simple once you practice it. So, for example, you might present the action of testing something by adding hows. It would sound something like, we tested our solution before executing, and how we did that was first, we conducted in person user feedback sessions with a small group of end users, asking them to test the two new features of our app. Then we conducted A B testing. Specifically, we ran A B tests of different versions of these new features, comparing engagement and satisfaction. And lastly, we conducted performance benchmarking to measure the new features' response time and reliability under different conditions. So instead of just saying that you tested your solution, I know exactly how you went about it, and I start to picture you doing it in the role. Back up each action with a minimum of three hows. 3 to 5 hows is typically good. And the best way to prepare for this is to write out what you did. Think chronological. What did you do first, second, third? Then indent and add how bullets under each what item. Because once you define the what, it's very easy to talk through how you did it. Now, let's flip over to hypothetical questions. Hypothetical questions are typically questions that start with, how would you handle X? I want you to imagine Y. What would you do in Z scenario? And I recommend using the CFAS method to answer these questions. So the CFAS method is clarify, framework, assumption, solution. And when talking about how, this will mostly come up in the solution component. And while clarifying can uncover data and the framework will keep you organized, we actually need to just take a moment to talk about the assumptions piece. This goes back to that psychological aspect of central versus peripheral. Without specific assumptions, even if you dive into the how in your solution, it will be peripheral because there's no visual for your interviewer to attach to. So, for example, instead of saying, let's assume we're working with a SaaS company, I would make a slightly more specific assumption. Let's assume we're working with a meal planning SaaS company focused on promoting healthy eating habits. And as you dive into the solution, let's go right back into showing the how from the testing perspective. So when you focus on testing, instead of saying we would want to test the features and get user feedback, you might say we'd want to test our product by taking the following steps. We could conduct user feedback sessions to test the ease of creating a weekly meal plan. We could observe them adding maybe recipes, adjusting serving sizes, and generating shopping lists. We could definitely A B test two versions of maybe the recipe function. For example, maybe one could be in list format, while the other could have more of a card style, displaying maybe displays that include images. And then lastly, we could conduct performance benchmarking by testing it during peak shopping hours, such as maybe Sunday evenings, to test reliability and see if we have any downtime issues. So now your interviewer not only knows how you might test that SaaS product, but they're also going through that visual journey of meal planning because these tests were connected to that great visual and your assumptions. And your how is much easier to articulate when testing for something very specific. And that's the best way to prepare to speak about your hows on the hypothetical side. And when you do this, when we create our plan, we start by actually pre planning assumptions of scenarios that you are so likely to face in the role. You're interviewing for a role where you likely have experience. Think about what you're going to face in that position. Then practice solving for these specific scenarios and diving deep into the how. I know that none of this is simple. I know that I spent a ton of time diving deep into the science and psychology. But utilizing the science and psychology as your foundation will give you a significant edge over your competitors. And then putting it into practice is ultimately what will get you those great results. Remember, it's all about how you accomplished it and how you would accomplish it. And that's what truly resonates and sticks in the minds of our interviewers. Good luck.